On their 5th wedding anniversary, I found a box of open condoms in Chloe's purse. Patrick's? I asked, pinching the small metallic foil packet between my fingers. Her face went deathly pale. I calmly put the wrapper away. Happy anniversary, Chloe. Anniversary. Jacob Vance slid the key into the lock. The brass teeth bit into the tumblers with a soft click. The apartment was dark, lit only by the neon glow of the city floating up from below, spilling across the floorboards. He reflexively reached for the switch by the door. Click. Cold, white light flooded the foyer. On the console table sat a small, wilting bouquet of daisies, the wrapping paper slightly crinkled. He'd made a point to buy them from the corner florist that morning before leaving for work. Chloe loved daisies. 5 years ago today, fresh out of college and poor as a church mouse, Jacob had stood before her with a similarly humble bouquet, his eyes red as he asked Chloe if she would marry him. She'd laughed, but her tears had fallen onto the back of his hand, so hot they made his heart tremble. There was a strange scent in the air. Jacob frowned. It was faint, like some cheap aftershave mixed with the gardenia perfume Chloe always wore, a dissonant note, jarring and out of place. He changed into his slippers. The living room was empty. No sound from the kitchen. His eyes swept over the couch, where a black women's handbag was tossed carelessly beside a throw pillow. Chloe's bag, a 5-year habit, etched into his bones. Chloe was always like this. She'd come home, drop her bag, and her phone and keys would clatter onto the coffee table. Jacob always had to clean up after her. He shook his head with a resigned sigh and walked over to pick up the bag. It was heavy. The inside of the strap was smudged with a bit of dirt, and he instinctively wiped it with his finger. The bag was partially unzipped. Jacob just meant to hang it on the hook on the wall. Tidying up was his instinct, but as he pulled the opening closed, his fingertips brushed against a small, hard square. It was cool with a metallic texture. He paused. His fingers slipped inside, hooked it, and the little square slid out, landing in his palm. Under the light, the object reflected a cold, silvery white glint. The edges of the torn foil wrapper were slightly frayed. It was empty, a used condom wrapper. Time seemed to freeze. The ticking of the old grandfather clock in the living room suddenly became heavy and loud, each second hammering against Jacob's eardrums. Thump, thump, thump. The smell of cheap aftershave in the air abruptly intensified, catching in his throat. He stared at the glaring little square in his palm. An icy numbness shot up from his fingertips, freezing his entire arm, followed by a boundless cold that drowned him completely. In his peripheral vision, the drooping petals of the daisies blurred into a muddled patch of grayish yellow. The kitchen door creaked open. Chloe emerged carrying a tray with 2 glasses of red wine, the light from the ceiling fixture reflecting in their bowls. She was smiling, her voice filled with the gentle cheer an anniversary called for. "You're home. How about a drink to start? I've got soup simmering. It's almost ready." Her words died in her throat. The smile evaporated from her face like a receding tide, taking all the color with it, leaving behind only a sheet of ghastly white. Her gaze was fixed on Jacob's outstretched palm, pinned to that tiny silver square. The tray in her hands trembled violently, the glasses clinking together with a sharp, panicked sound. Dead silence. The ticking of the clock was deafening. Jacob looked up. His movements were slow, as if he were bending a piece of rusted iron. He looked at Chloe's ashen face, at the eyes that once held constellations, now filled with nothing but terror and a vast, inescapable shame. Her lips trembled like a drowning person's, yet no sound of help escaped them. Something was rampaging inside his chest, roaring to tear through his skin and burst out. But Jacob's face remained a perfect, emotionless mask. All the sound was suppressed, crushed into a bottomless black hole. He pinched the small, cold piece of foil in his right hand. His left hand slowly rose, reaching toward Chloe's heaving chest. She flinched back half a step, her body tensed like a fully drawn bow. Jacob's fingers didn't touch her. He just opened his hand in front of her. The used wrapper lay in his palm. He spoke, his voice as calm and sharp as shattered ice, as flat as a frozen lake, without a ripple of emotion. "Patrick's." Chloe looked as if she'd been struck by a bolt of invisible lightning. Her body convulsed, the terror in her eyes exploding, nearly leaping from their sockets. She bit down hard on her lower lip, her teeth leaving deep impressions on the pale skin. She didn't dare meet Jacob's eyes, staring instead at his open hand, where the silver object burned like a red-hot brand. Jacob's gaze was like a pair of cold scalpels, slowly scraping across every inch of her rigid face, over her clenched jaw, over the lashes trembling from sheer terror. No answer was needed. Her reaction, her silence, the deathly pallor of her face, it was the loudest confession. He held his hand open for a few seconds more. Then his fingers slowly closed, clenching the tiny, humiliating piece of evidence tightly in his fist. The sharp edge of the foil dug into his skin, a pinpoint of pain. The sensation, strangely, brought a moment of clarity to his chaotic mind. He walked past the petrified Chloe, straight to the foyer. His steps were steady, unwavering. He bent down and opened the top drawer of the shoe cabinet. Inside were spare keys, loose change, and a few expired utility bills, all neatly arranged. He expressionlessly placed the searing piece of foil into a cold corner of the drawer, his motion as gentle as if he were setting down a precious commemorative coin. He closed the drawer and straightened up. He turned around. Chloe was still frozen in place, holding the trembling tray, a soulless plaster statue. Only her eyes churned with a tide of fear and despair. Her lips parted, as if to say something. "Happy anniversary, Chloe," Jacob said again, his voice just as placid. 5 words, delivered in a complete monotone. No sarcasm, no anger, just a bone-deep, deadening chill. He walked past her, toward the center of the living room, without giving her another glance. The fluorescent lights in the office were blindingly white, the air conditioner humming as it pumped out cold air. Jacob sat at his desk, the dense grid of numbers and spreadsheets on his screen like a deep gray swamp, exuding a dry, cold aura. He moved the mouse with his right hand, clicking open an audit report attachment. His left hand rested unconsciously on a metal paperweight on his desk. Its coldness seeped through his fingertips. His phone lit up silently on the corner of his desk. He glanced at it. "Chloe, Jake, we need to talk." The timestamp was 7:40 a.m. Before he left, his fingertips scraped against the cold edge of the paperweight. He didn't reply. The screen quickly went dark, as if it had never lit up at all. The clatter of keyboards filled the office, punctuated by ringing phones and the low hum of work-related conversations. It all seemed to be happening behind a thick, invisible wall of glass. In Jacob's world, there was only the cold piece of foil in the corner of the drawer and Chloe's instantly bloodless face. 3:17 p.m. The office door was thrown open, bringing a gust of wind. Patrick Hale strode in, dressed in a tailored dark gray suit, his hair impeccably styled. His face was alight with an irrepressible, triumphant smile. The soles of his leather shoes made a sharp, confident sound on the tile floor. He held a folder and walked directly toward the office of their department head, Mr. Davis. As he passed Jacob's desk, he seemed to deliberately slow his pace, his eyes sweeping over with a self-satisfied, condescending air. "Mr. Davis, the final proposal you asked for." Patrick's voice came clearly through the glass door, tinged with eager deference and a hint of self-congratulation. Jacob picked up the cold mug on his desk and took a sip of tasteless coffee. The bitterness spread across his tongue. He watched Patrick's silhouette disappear behind the frosted glass, his expression as still as a frozen, deep lake. With a flick of his right hand, the mouse clicked open the company's internal portal. At the top of the page, the words "official announcement" stood out in bold red. The first item was about the proposed candidate for the director of the audit department. In large, red font. Following a review, it has been decided to propose the appointment of Mr. Patrick Hale as director of the audit department. The public comment period is from XX/XX/XXXX to XX/XX/XXXX, 5 business days. If you have any objections, please report them to the Ethics and Compliance Department during this period. Hotline XXXXXX. Patrick Hale's name was embedded there like a searing brand. The cursor hovered over Patrick's name for a few seconds, then moved to click open the attachment, his detailed resume and performance review. Jacob's eyes scanned quickly over the boilerplate praise: outstanding political integrity, exceptional professional competence, rich management experience, well regarded by his peers. Finally, his gaze stopped on the section titled Major Achievements of the Last 3 Years. His fingertips tightened unconsciously on the cold paperweight, his knuckles turning white. Leo, the colleague at the next desk, leaned over, his voice a low, excited whisper. "Hey Jake, you see this? Looks like Pat really got it. It's a done deal." Jacob's gaze shifted from the screen to Leo, his face impassive. "Yeah, it's official. Damn, so many people were gunning for that spot. Pat really knows how to play the game." Leo marveled, leaning in closer. "You think he's going to be even more of a hard ass now? Just last week he chewed out old Mark over some tiny mistake on an expense report." Jacob's lips twitched into a faint curve, utterly devoid of warmth. Whether he gets cocky or not, we'll see. His voice was low, as calm as if he were stating a simple fact. Leo felt a little awkward at his flat response, rubbing his nose as he retreated. Yeah, guess so. Time flowed on, measured by the clatter of keyboards. When Patrick emerged from Mr. Davis's office, his smile was even broader, tinged with relief. He was in such a good mood, he even patted the shoulder of a young auditor who had just walked in. Jacob clicked open an encrypted folder on his local drive. Inside were project files neatly organized. His eyes scanned the folder names, finally landing on one labeled 2022 Q4, Apex Holdings Special Audit, archived. He double-clicked. The folder was filled with scanned receipts, contract copies, Excel spreadsheets, audit work papers, and logs. He scrolled down quickly. The cursor stopped on a PDF file, Final Audit Report for Apex Holdings Project, review copy. On the last few pages were dense footnotes to the financial statements. Jacob's gaze, sharp as a hawk's, pinpointed a few lines of text concerning a large, long-standing other receivables balance. The wording was slick, merely mentioning that it had been outstanding for an extended period and requires ongoing monitoring, and then moved on. He clicked open a subfolder named Original Work Papers. Amid a jumble of numbered files, he quickly found several scanned copies of handwritten verification records. On one page, the handwriting was messy, but the key figures and company name were clear. Next to the record, a small note was penciled in, faint but legible. Suspected undisclosed related party fund appropriation. Evidence chain is weak. Patrick ordered us to drop it. Jacob's hand left the cold metal paperweight and moved to the mouse. He right-clicked on the scan verification record with the crucial note. Select print. The printer in the corner of the office hummed to life, spitting out a few sheets of paper, still warm to the touch. Jacob stood up and walked over to retrieve them. He didn't return his desk, but went to an unused photocopier in the corner. He fed the papers in, and the machine whirred. A few crisp copies emerged. He carefully tucked the original sheets into a hardcover notebook he owned. The copies he folded and placed in the inner pocket of his suit jacket, right over his heart. It felt like carrying a block of ice, or perhaps a bomb about to detonate. After all this, he sat back down and opened the announcement on the company portal again. Patrick Hale's name still glowed in red. He picked up his desk phone, his fingertips landing on the keypad. Without hesitation, he dialed, one number at a time. A long tone sounded in the earpiece. Once, twice, 3 times. Hello, Ethics and Compliance. A serious, slightly weary middle-aged man's voice answered. Jacob's voice was perfectly steady, clear, and concise. Hello, I'm calling about the announcement concerning the proposed appointment of Mr. Patrick Hale as Director of Audit. I have information to report. It involves his potential concealment of significant audit findings and violation of professional standards during the Apex Holdings audit. I will send specific evidence to the designated email address anonymously. The subject line will include the words official complaint. There was a moment of silence on the other end. Then the voice grew heavy. Understood. We have received your report. Please. The man seemed to want more details. The evidence is all in the email. Jacob interrupted, his tone still calm. I'll only state the facts. Click. He hung up the phone decisively. The sound of the receiver settling into its cradle was crisp. For the rest of the afternoon, the office hummed with its usual mix of busy work and idle chat. Patrick sat in his corner office, talking on the phone, his voice tinged with laughter. Jacob opened his email client and composed a new message. The recipient's address was already committed to memory. He attached the scanned copies of the key records. The body of the email contained only a few cold lines. To the Ethics and Compliance Department. This is a report concerning Mr. Patrick Hale's conduct during the Apex Holdings Special Audit Project IDXX 2022 Q4. Despite being aware of a significant suspected case of related party fund appropriation, see attached records, and possessing supporting audit evidence, he used his authority to instruct the audit team to cease further investigation, potentially to mitigate risk or for other considerations. This resulted in the failure to disclose a material finding in the final audit report, constituting a serious breach of professional duty and ethics. His actions disqualify him from the position of director of the audit department. Please investigate accordingly. Attached are screenshots of the original verification records, copies. Submitted anonymously, XX/XX/XXXX. The cursor moved to the send button. Without a pause, he clicked. The message sent notification popped up and vanished. The screen returned to the audit spreadsheet. Jacob picked up the now completely cold coffee and took another sip. The frigid liquid slid down his throat, bringing with it a strange sense of calm. In his office, Patrick seemed to have just finished a call. He was adjusting his tie in the reflection of his monitor, his face still wearing that look of ambition fulfilled. Jacob looked at the numbers dancing on his screen, picked up a pen, and began writing a new calculation in the margin of a work paper. The nib scratched against the paper. His movements were steady and focused, as if nothing had just happened. The days passed between Jacob and Chloe like sand mixed with lead, heavy and silent. The apartment became a vast, suffocating icebox. Jacob no longer slept in the master bedroom. The narrow futon in the study was now his bed. Chloe had tried to speak, but the moment her lips moved, Jacob's gaze would sweep over her. It wasn't a look of anger or blame, but of a dead silence that froze everything. All of Chloe's words would freeze in her throat, leaving only a deeper dread to pool in her eyes. Jake, one morning, as Jacob was getting a glass of water in the kitchen, Chloe finally mustered her courage, her voice thick with tears as she blocked the doorway. That night, it was the celebration dinner. We all drank too much. It was just once. I swear. Please, just believe me this one time. Jacob's hand, holding the glass, was perfectly steady. He turned sideways, his gaze moving past Chloe's pale face and swollen, red eyes to the tiled wall behind her, as if studying its pattern. He spoke, his voice like a wind blowing across an empty, frozen plain. Once, he paused, a humorless curve touching his lips. Or a month, 3 months, or longer. That thing in your purse. Was that the first time? The blood drained from Chloe's face, her lips trembling violently. You? How could you? Based on the facts, Jacob cut her off, his voice still level, as if reciting an equation that had nothing to do with him. Chloe, between us, there are only facts left. Don't talk to me about feelings. He carried his glass of water and walked straight past her. The faint draft he created brushed against Chloe's cheek, so cold it made her shudder. The clear water in the glass didn't even ripple. He didn't need her confession. He didn't need her explanation. All of that, along with the illusion called home, had been utterly shattered by that cold foil wrapper on their anniversary night. Suppressed sobs came from behind the closed bedroom door, muffled, like the whimpering of a wounded animal. Jacob sat on the futon in the study, the laptop screen glowing in front of him. He was looking at the file directory of his dashcam's memory card. The cold light of the screen illuminated his expressionless face. The timestamps were almost all concentrated between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. Jacob's finger slid across the cold trackpad, selecting all the nighttime video files from the past month. Right-click, copy. A progress bar crawled across the screen. Outside the window, the night was heavy and dark. The crying from the bedroom slowly subsided into hopeless, intermittent gasps. The progress bar filled. Jacob unplugged the card reader. He opened a professional video editing program on his computer, its interface complex and cold. He dragged the copied dashcam footage onto the timeline. He scrubbed through the footage, the images flashing by, streets under yellow streetlights, the rising arm of a parking garage entrance, the dim, blurry interior of the underground lot. His gaze was sharp as a hawk's, precisely hunting for his target in the rapidly changing frames. Finally, the image froze on a parking spot in a corner. A familiar black Audi A6 was parked there, Patrick's car. The date and timestamp in the bottom right corner read, last Wednesday, 10:07 p.m. Jacob moved the timeline cursor precisely to this point and hit play. The image shook slightly. His own car, from the dashcam's perspective, pulled into the adjacent spot and stopped. A few seconds later, the passenger side door opened, and Chloe's figure appeared in the corner of the frame, her steps a little unsteady. She didn't head for the elevator lobby. Instead, she hesitated for a moment, then walked toward the black Audi. She knocked on the driver's side window. The window rolled down. Patrick's face appeared, first with surprise, then a smile. Chloe opened the door and got in. The Audi's windows were darkly tinted. From the dashcam's angle, only the blurry silhouettes of 2 people moving inside were visible. But soon, the car began to rock with a gentle, rhythmic motion. Back and forth. The movement wasn't large, but it was sustained. After about 10 minutes, the rocking intensified, the frequency quickening. The blurry silhouettes inside tangled together, moving in a violent up-and-down rhythm. This lasted for another 3 or 4 minutes before the motion stopped abruptly and then ceased altogether. The timestamp read, 10:21 p.m. Then, the Audi's passenger door opened. Chloe emerged, head down, her steps even more unsteady than before, almost staggering. She hurried toward the elevator lobby and disappeared from the frame. The entire event lasted about 14 minutes. The light from the computer screen reflected on Jacob's face. He stared, unblinking, at the frozen frame of the rocking car with its blurry silhouettes, until the progress bar reached the end and the screen went dark. No more sounds came from the bedroom. It was dead silent. Jacob leaned back against the hard futon, closing his eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, they were filled with a profound, Arctic cold. He clicked an inconspicuous icon, logging into an encrypted offshore file transfer platform with an all-English interface. He created an anonymous account. He knew the process by heart. Returning to the editing software, he selected the crucial 14-minute clip and exported it. In the export settings, he checked the boxes for image enhancement, sharpen, and increase contrast. Export format: MP4, high definition. Once the video was processed, he logged into a brand new email account with completely fake registration details. In the recipient field, he didn't type a specific address, but an email distribution list, all under staff at VanceCorp.com. For the subject line, he typed, character by character, urgent, audit director Patrick Hale and Chloe Vance parking garage tryst, and censored HD video. The body of the email was blank. No explanation, just a naked, brutal title and the cold attachment. The cursor hovered over the send button. With almost no thought, his finger fell. The message sent confirmation box appeared and then vanished. Jacob closed the laptop. The light from the screen died, plunging the study into absolute darkness. He sat there in the thick blackness, perfectly still. Time ticked by. The heart in his chest, long encased in ice, seemed to develop a fine crack. Through it, a faint but real, almost scalding warmth began to seep out. He picked up his phone. The screen's pale blue light illuminated his jawline. He opened a few of the company's private, non-work-related group chats on WhatsApp. As expected, the quiet chats had erupted as if a bomb had been dropped. Group Chat 1, Audit Department. Vent Channel WTF. I think I just went blind. Did you guys get that email? What email? Link, screenshot of email subject line. JPG holy SHIT. The parking garage. Patrick the Tyrant Hale? No fucking way. Is it real? I opened it. That's Chloe from Risk Management. HD. It's legit HD. Look at that car shake. Didn't know he had it in him. Chloe? Isn't that Jacob's wife? Oh my god. This is insane. Check your email. The whole company got it. Patrick is so fucking done. Group Chat 2. The water cooler, it's blowing up. The company server just got nuked. Did you see the video? It's wild. Chloe always seems so innocent. Who knew she was like that? In Patrick's car, man, poor Jacob. The spot where they parked is perfect. Just out of the main camera's view? No, wait. Looks like it was filmed from the car next to them. Who did this? This is brutal. Who cares who did it? Patrick's reputation is toast. Serve him right for being such an arrogant prick. The phone screen flickered in the darkness, the rapidly scrolling messages like the flicking tongues of vipers, poisoning the night. Jacob's thumb slid lightly over the cold screen, browsing the words of shock, contempt, mockery, and schadenfreude. The words danced, their faint light reflecting in his bottomless pupils. A very faint, cold curve finally climbed onto his lips. It wasn't a smile. It was more like something sharp and suppressed to its absolute limit, finally breaking through the ice. He put down the phone and sat up straight again in the darkness. The world around him was silent, but an invisible tidal wave was already sweeping through the company's network, nailing those two names to a pillar of shame. The air crackled with tension. Patrick Hale had vanished completely. His corner office, a symbol of his status, was empty, collecting a thin layer of dust. The company intranet announcement of his dismissal and investigation was glaringly prominent. Chloe had also taken an extended leave of absence. Her desk in the risk management department sat vacant, an ugly scar on the office landscape. Everyone at the company walked on eggshells, avoiding eye contact, but in every corner, the aftershocks of the video scandal were still being discussed in hushed tones. Jacob's name came up frequently, accompanied by sympathy, morbid curiosity, and complicated silence. Jacob himself was the calmest person of all. He continued to arrive and leave on time, review reports, and visit client sites, pointing out minute errors in his subordinates' work papers in a flat tone. He was like a precision machine running on a set program, stable, cold, and flawless. Only occasionally, in an unguarded moment, his gaze would drift toward the empty corner office or the direction of the risk management department, and a swift, cold glint would flash in the depths of his lake-like eyes. He still slept on the futon in the study. Chloe seemed to have retreated into the bedroom entirely, becoming a silent ghost. Only the dwindling food in the kitchen and the fingerprint smudges on a water glass proved she still existed. The apartment had become a tomb, burying 2 unexploded bombs. Patrick's car reappeared in its old spot in the corner of the parking garage, level B2. As Jacob drove in, his eyes caught it in the rearview mirror. The black Audi sat like a dormant beast, lurking in the dim light. Jacob parked his own car and turned off the engine, but he didn't get out right away. He sat quietly in the driver's seat, his fingers tapping lightly on the cold leather of the steering wheel. The clock was ticking. He was waiting. The minutes dragged on. The garage air was thick with the cold smell of motor oil and dust. Other cars came and went, their engines and closing doors echoing in the distance before fading away. Jacob was like a statue, only the occasional blink of his eyes proving he wasn't frozen in time. Finally, the sound of footsteps, approaching from a distance, broke the silence of the corner of B2. The steps were heavy, dragging with a frustrated, unsteady rhythm on the cold concrete floor. Jacob's gaze sharpened instantly, locking onto the source of the sound. Patrick appeared. He looked like a different person. His hair was greasy and matted, the once immaculate suit now a wrinkled mess on his frame, his tie askew. He was unshaven, his eyes sunken. The man looked as if his spine had been ripped out, collapsed in on himself, reeking of stale alcohol. He was clutching a half-empty plastic bottle of cheap whiskey. He staggered, practically slamming into the back of his own black Audi. With a clatter, the bottle fell to the ground. It didn't break, but rolled a few times, a small puddle of amber liquid spreading on the concrete. Patrick mumbled a curse and fumbled in his pocket for his keys. They jingled as he tried several times to fit the key into the lock, his hand trembling. This was it. Jacob pushed his car door open without a sound. He wasn't wearing dress shoes, but a pair of dark, soft-soled running shoes that made almost no noise on the ground. He moved like a shadow, blending into the dim light, weaving quickly and silently through the rows of cars, closing in on the unsuspecting back of the man struggling with his car door. Patrick seemed to sense something, and he began to turn his head, slow and drunk. Jacob was faster. His left hand shot out like lightning, clamping down hard over Patrick's mouth from behind. The hand was dry, cold, and possessed an undeniable, iron-like strength, completely sealing off any potential scream. Simultaneously, his right arm wrapped around Patrick's torso and arms, pinning him against the cold metal of the car door. MMPH! Patrick's cry was smothered in his throat, reduced to a short, terrified whimper. The stench of alcohol and a wave of desperate fear filled the air. He struggled wildly, his body flailing like a fish thrown on land, his elbows jabbing backward into Jacob's ribs. His shoes kicked frantically against the car and the ground, making dull thuds and scraping sounds. His strength was greater than Jacob had anticipated. Patrick may have been a wreck, but he was still a grown man, and the alcohol and fear had ignited a primal, desperate power in him. Jacob grunted as a sharp pain lanced through his side, but the arm around Patrick only tightened, the veins popping on his forearm. He lowered his center of gravity, driving his knee into the back of Patrick's, using the car door as leverage to completely immobilize him. Quiet, Jacob's voice was a cold, slick whisper right by his ear, like a snake slithering over skin. "Or I'll cripple you." Patrick's body went rigid. Jacob's right hand released its grip and slipped into the pocket of his heavy jacket. He pulled out a small, brown glass bottle. It had no label and a small amount of clear, colorless liquid sloshed inside. It had a metal screw cap. Patrick felt the shift in movement. Fear instantly overwhelmed everything else, and he began to struggle with renewed frenzy. Muffled, terrified whimpers escaped from behind the hand covering his mouth. Jacob was unmoved. He clamped the cold bottle cap between his teeth and twisted it hard. With a soft hiss, the cap came off. An incredibly pungent, acrid smell erupted from the bottle. It was like rotten eggs mixed with harsh chemicals, a stench that shot straight to the brain and made one want to gag. When Patrick smelled it, his pupils contracted to pinpricks. He realized what it was. The terror in him peaked, and he exploded with one last burst of strength, twisting and slamming his body with no regard for himself. He threw his head back violently, aiming for Jacob's face. Jacob was ready. He snapped his head to the side. The back of Patrick's skull slammed into his cheekbone, sending a dull ache through his face. But the hand over Patrick's mouth didn't move an inch. If anything, it pressed down harder, forcing Patrick's head back painfully, his neck completely exposed. Now, Jacob's right hand moved like lightning. Without a moment's hesitation, he aimed the mouth of the bottle at Patrick's crotch and splashed its contents downward. A sickening sizzle, soft, yet utterly horrifying. The sound of a red-hot iron being pressed onto a wet cloth. Erg, A-H-H-H-H. Most of Patrick's scream was muffled by Jacob's hand, transformed into an inhuman, strangled, agonizing howl. His alcohol-numbed body erupted with an unprecedented, twisted, terrifying force, convulsing as if he'd been electrocuted. His legs clamped shut, his body arching like a cooked shrimp, then violently bucking, tried to escape the source of the hellish, burning pain. Each convulsion slammed him against the car door with a muffled thump. Jacob felt the lips beneath his palm twist and open in agony, the teeth even grazing the edge of his hand. But he held fast. Patrick's body spasmed violently. A scorched chemical stench, an indescribable, foul odor, quickly filled the small space. It was over in 10 seconds, maybe 20. For Patrick, it was an eternity. His struggles weakened visibly. The howl devolved into a dying, intermittent gasp for air, his body shaking like a leaf. Jacob abruptly released his hand and took a step back. Like a heap of completely ruined filth, Patrick slid down the smooth, cold car door and collapsed in the small puddle he'd made. He curled into a fetal position, his hands clutching his groin, his body shaking violently and silently. Snot, tears, and saliva streamed down his face, mixing with the dust on the ground, creating a disgusting mess. His mouth was open, but only a hoarse, gasping sound came out. His eyes rolled back in his head, his pupils dilated, tears of pure physical shock pouring out uncontrollably. Jacob didn't spare a glance at the twitching heap on the ground. He quickly screwed the cap back on the brown glass bottle and shoved it back into his jacket pocket. He took 2 steps back, his cold gaze sweeping the area, dim, silent, with only the distant echo of a passing car. No cameras were pointed at this corner. He turned and walked away, his steps still light, a silent shadow that quickly vanished into the darkness between the rows of cars. On the ground, Patrick's curled body continued to tremble uncontrollably, emitting broken, desperate whimpers. The nauseating smell of burnt flesh and acrid chemicals hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The white light of the bathroom fixture poured down, the tiles cold underfoot. The faucet was on full blast, a powerful stream of water hammering into the stainless steel sink, splashing up tiny droplets, making a hollow, roaring sound. Jacob stood before the sink, head down, the water rushing over his hands. The water was warm, but only felt like a numbing cold against his skin. He scrubbed his palms, between his fingers, his wrists, over and over. He could still imagine the nauseating taste of Patrick's saliva, a mix of alcohol and fear, under his fingernails. His ribs, where he'd need him, throbbed with a dull ache, a reminder of the struggle. He turned off the faucet. The sound stopped abruptly, leaving the bathroom in an amplified silence. He pulled a clean white towel from the rack and dried his hands with forceful, deliberate motions. Each movement was almost mechanical, meticulously precise. When he was done, he tossed the towel back onto the rack, where it landed in a slightly damp heap. He walked out of the bathroom, through the empty, silent living room, to the large floor-to-ceiling window. Outside was the city at night, a glittering, cold galaxy of a million lights. He slid the window open. The frigid, early winter air rushed in, carrying the scent of dust and distant traffic, dispersing the stagnant, heavy atmosphere inside. Jacob wasn't wearing a jacket, just a thin, dark sweatsuit. The cold wind whipped against his face, lifting the hair from his forehead, revealing a smooth, cold brow. He took a deep breath. The sharp air stung his lungs, but it strangely loosened the heavy block of lead that had been sitting in his chest for days. Down below, the stark red and blue of police lights silently revolved, shattering the nighttime quiet of the apartment complex. The light reflected off the windows of the building opposite, flashing like strange, blinking eyes. A police car was parked near the entrance to their building, its doors closed. No one had gotten out yet. Jacob stood high above, his calm gaze fixed on the flashing lights. The wind tugged at his clothes. His face was a mask, no surprise, no panic, not even a ripple of emotion. The flashing red and blue lights reflected in his eyes, revealing the depths of a frozen lake. Behind him came the faint, uncontrollable sound of chattering teeth. Click, clack, clack. Chloe had emerged from the bedroom at some point. She was barefoot on the cold floor, wearing a thin nightgown, her hair plastered messily to her pale cheeks. She hugged her arms, her body shaking like a leaf, her terrified eyes darting between Jacob's back at the window and the flashing police lights below. Fear, like a cold tide, was drowning her. The police. Her voice was so shaky it was barely intelligible, each syllable trembling. Jacob, it's the police. They're here. As if all her strength had been drained, she slid down the cold wall and crumpled into a heap in a dark corner of the living room, her body curled into a ball, shaking like the last leaf in an autumn wind. Jacob turned around slowly. The flashing lights cast shifting shadows on his face, making his expression unreadable. He looked at the trembling ball of a woman in the corner, his eyes devoid of warmth, filled only with a quiet indifference, as if he were looking at an old, irrelevant piece of furniture. Chloe looked up and met his gaze. The dead silence and coldness in his eyes made her break completely. A terrible thought seized her. Jacob, she shrieked, her voice sharp and piercing with terror, shattering the silence in the room. You're insane. What else did you do? Patrick, what did you do to him? Her eyes shot to the flashing lights below, then darted away as if burned, her overwhelming fear making her incoherent. The police. They're here for you, aren't they? Jacob, are you crazy? You'll go to prison. You'll get the death penalty. Jacob watched her hysterical, screaming in silence. After a few seconds, he suddenly moved the corner of his mouth. It was a real smile. His lips curved upward into a clear arc, revealing his teeth. But the smile didn't reach his eyes. They remained as cold and deep as a glacier frozen for 1,000 years, reflecting an almost demonic light under the flashing red and blue. He tilted his head slightly, looking at her as if she were an amusing spectacle. His voice was low, but it cut through her screams, laced with a playful, cold mockery, and something else. A dangerous excitement, as if something had finally been ignited. We're just getting started, he said softly. The words fell into the dead air like a drop of ice hitting the floor. Chloe's screaming stopped cold. It was as if she'd been choked, her mouth open but no sound coming out. Only her body continued to tremble uncontrollably. She stared at the cold, almost bloodthirsty smile on Jacob's face, at the eerie shadows cast behind him by the revolving police lights, and a bone-deep, annihilating chill took complete hold of her. From downstairs came the distinct sound of car doors opening and closing, followed by several heavy footsteps. The steps echoed clearly in the stairwell, steady and imposing, climbing one flight at a time, their destination clear. A key slid into the lock, turned. The deadbolt made a dull thud as it unlocked, followed by the soft creak of the door being pushed open. Jacob stood in the center of the living room without turning around. He faced the open window, the early winter night wind pouring in, plastering his thin clothes to his body. The revolving red and blue lights washed over him, a flowing, silent neon painting. Two police officers walked in, dressed in dark uniforms, their caps pulled low, their expressions grim. One was older, with a square face and eyes as sharp as a hawk's, carrying the weight of years and scrutiny. The other was younger, tall and broad, his lips pressed into a thin line, his gaze sweeping the room with the tension of a rookie. We're with the Chicago PD, the older officer said, his voice steady as he showed his badge, his eyes fixed on Jacob's straight back. Jacob Vance? Yes, Jacob replied, finally turning around slowly. His face showed no surprise or panic. He was as calm as if greeting a neighbor coming home from work. His eyes were clear, meeting the officer's probing gaze without flinching. Is there a problem, officers? The older officer's stare was like a searchlight, meticulously scanning Jacob's face, looking for a crack, a hint of fear, but finding only placid calm. His gaze shifted to a corner of the living room. Chloe was still curled up there like a terrified animal, shaking violently, her head buried in her knees, not daring to look up. This afternoon, around 5:30 p.m., your company's former director of audit, Patrick Hale, was viciously assaulted in the Grandview Tower parking garage. Level B2, the younger officer began, his words crisp and official. His injuries are severe. He's been hospitalized and is in stable condition, but he suffered chemical burns to his lower body. The damage may result in permanent loss of function. His eyes locked onto Jacob. Our investigation shows that your vehicle's entry and exit logs place you in the garage at the time of the incident. Furthermore, based on partial surveillance footage and background checks, we know you had direct professional and personal conflicts with Mr. Hale recently. He paused, his tone hardening. Mr. Vance, we need you to cooperate with our investigation, answer some questions, and provide any relevant physical evidence. Of course, Jacob nodded, a faint, cooperative smile even touching his lips. Please ask away. He walked to the sofa and sat down gracefully, crossing his legs, his posture relaxed and confident, as if he were in a routine job interview. During the time of the incident between 5:10 and 5:40 p.m., where were you? The older officer asked, his gaze unwavering. At the office, Jacob answered without a flicker of hesitation. I normally get off at 5, but I had a project work paper that needed an urgent review. I stayed late, leaving around 5:35. The elevator and office access keycard logs should confirm that. And you went straight to the garage after leaving? Yes. Took the west side elevator down to level B2, directly to my parking spot. How long were you in the garage? Parked the car, grabbed a few things, and left within a minute or so, Jacob said, his pace steady. Drove straight out of the B2 exit. The attendant booth would have a record of the time. Did you see or hear anything unusual during that time? An argument? A call for help? Did you see Patrick Hale? The younger officer pressed. Jacob frowned slightly, as if trying hard to remember, then shook his head. No, the garage was quiet. The spots on level B2 are in a corner, and the lighting is dim. I wasn't paying attention to anyone else. I just got in my car and left. The older officer's gaze shifted to Chloe in the corner. Ms. Vance? Chloe flinched as if pricked by a needle. She slowly lifted her head from her knees, revealing a pair of terrified, bloodshot eyes. She looked at the officers, her lips trembling, unable to form a word. Do you know about Mr. Hale's assault? Do you recall what time Mr. Vance came home from work today? The officer asked. Chloe's gaze darted like a frightened rabbit's toward Jacob, who was sitting calmly on the sofa. Jacob was also looking at her, his expression as placid as two deep, bottomless wells. The moment her eyes met his, Chloe's trembling intensified. She quickly ducked her head, her voice a barely audible whisper, thick with tears. I don't know. He was late. Very late. Her words were incoherent. We need to search your personal belongings and your vehicle, the younger officer said, turning back to Jacob, his tone leaving no room for argument. Be my guest, Jacob nodded. He stood up and proactively walked to the console table by the door, picking up his car keys and handing them over. The car is in its usual spot in the garage. As for the apartment, he opened his hands, gesturing around the room. Feel free, officers. The two officers exchanged a look. The younger one took the keys. I'll check the garage. He turned and went downstairs. The older officer remained in the living room. He pulled on a pair of disposable gloves and began a meticulous search. He started with the jacket and pants Jacob had left in the foyer, checking the pockets. He found only a phone, a wallet, and a standard metal keychain. He moved on to the study, opening drawers, sifting through papers, checking the computer. Then he went into the bedroom, opening the closet and inspecting the clothes. His movements were professional and efficient. Jacob sat back down on the sofa, watching quietly. His gaze occasionally drifted to Chloe, still curled in the corner, shaking like a leaf. There was no emotion in his eyes, as indifferent as if he were observing an old piece of furniture. Time passed in silent searching. The only sounds in the living room were the officer moving things and Chloe's suppressed, broken sobs. About 20 minutes later, the younger officer returned, holding several evidence bags. He gave the older officer a slight shake of his head, indicating he'd found nothing suspicious in the car. The older officer had also completed his preliminary search of the apartment. He emerged from the study with an empty evidence bag, clearly having found nothing. Mr. Vance, we need you to provide the jacket, pants, and shoes you were wearing at the time of the incident, the older officer said, stepping in front of Jacob, his gaze as sharp as ever. No problem. Jacob stood and walked to the foyer, cooperatively taking the dark jacket and matching pants from the coat rack. He then pulled a pair of freshly polished, dark brown leather loafers from the shoe cabinet and handed them over. These are the ones. The officer carefully placed the clothes and shoes into separate evidence bags and sealed them. The older officer's gaze finally settled on Jacob's left hand. Near the base of his thumb was a small, fresh scratch, as if from a fingernail, slightly red. This injury? He asked, pointing to Jacob's palm. Jacob glanced at his hand, his tone flat. Oh, that. Scraped it on the metal edge of a file binder this afternoon while I was reviewing the work papers. It's nothing. The officer stared at the small cut for a few seconds, then said no more. He took one last look at the two of them, his gaze lingering for a moment on Chloe's despairing face before returning to Jacob's unnervingly calm one. "Thank you for your cooperation. We'll be in touch if we have any further questions." His voice was still steady, but now carried a note of official finality. The officers left. The sound of the security door closing echoed dully in the suddenly silent living room. Jacob stood where he was, listening as the footsteps faded down the hallway and disappeared. He slowly walked back to the still open window. The police car below was gone. The flashing lights vanished. Only the dim yellow glow of the complex's streetlights remained, outlining the cold contours of the night. He took a deep breath of the frigid air, then slowly exhaled. The foul, stagnant air that had been trapped in his chest for so long seemed to dissipate completely with the officer's departure. An unprecedented feeling of clear, cold satisfaction rose up from his limbs, like an Arctic spring flooding molten lava, bringing a strange and intense clarity and power. He closed the window, shutting out the cold. Then, he turned and walked with steady steps toward the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator, the cool light from inside illuminating his calm profile. He took out a half-empty bottle of red wine and a stem glass. The crisp sound of the corkscrew turning. The deep, ruby-red liquid poured slowly into the clear glass. Jacob carried the glass back to the center of the living room. He didn't turn on the main lights, using only the faint glow from outside and the residual light from the refrigerator. He strolled to the corner where Chloe was huddled and stopped. The wine swirled in the glass, reflecting a dark glint in the dim light. He looked down at the trembling figure on the floor, as if admiring a fragile, cornered work of art. He raised the glass, both to the corner and to the silent night outside that had just seen the police away. His lips curved upward, slowly, into a clear, cold, and utterly warmthless arc. His voice was low and clear, reverberating in the vast living room. New beginnings. He tilted his head back, the cool liquid sliding down his throat. It felt as if the cold wine carried an electric current, instantly igniting every dormant cell in his body. A powerful, all-consuming exhilaration, like a beast freed from all its chains, roared silently in his heart, surging and unstoppable. This intense, swelling pleasure, tinged with destruction, filled his entire chest until it felt ready to burst. He drank slowly, savoring each sip with an almost religious devotion. The glass was empty. He set it down on the coffee table with a soft, crisp click. From start to finish, he never once glanced at Chloe in the corner again. At the sound of the glass hitting the table, Chloe flinched violently and finally lifted her head. Her pale face was streaked with tears, her eyes swollen red. She watched Jacob straight back as he set down the glass, watched as he turned and walked directly toward the study. "Jacob," she called out, her voice a hoarse, broken plea, filled with the desperate appeal of a drowning person grasping for the last piece of driftwood. The study door, amid her desperate cry, closed with a soft click. It shut her out, along with her broken plea, trapping her completely in a cold, desolate world. The radiator hissed, pumping heat into the room, making the air almost stuffy. But Chloe felt no warmth. She was wrapped in a thick wool blanket, curled up in her favorite armchair in the living room. Yet her body still felt as if it were submerged in ice water, cold to the bone. She had been in this position since the night the police left, a frozen, soulless statue. The phone on the coffee table beside her began to vibrate violently, a persistent, death rattle buzz. The screen flashed a blinding white light in the darkness. Chloe's eyes moved with excruciating slowness toward the screaming device. 2 words pulsed on the screen, "Mom." As if burned, she shrank deeper into the blanket, her body trembling even more fiercely. She didn't want to answer. She couldn't. She knew what that call meant. The hellish world outside, the predatory gazes, the whispers, the frantic pointing, had already crawled through the invisible wires into her phone, into her social media, and now it was about to crawl into the quiet, stable lives of her parents. The vibration finally stopped. The screen went dark. A moment of silence. Then it started again, more frantic, more urgent than before. The word "Mom" jumped menacingly on the screen, vowing not to stop until she answered. Chloe's trembling fingers reached out cold and stiff. She fumbled with the screen, her fingertips slipping several times. Finally, she managed to swipe to answer, pressing the cold phone to her ear. "Mom." She managed a single, choked sob of a word. On the other end, her mother's voice was like sandpaper, hoarse, sharp, and on the verge of a complete breakdown. It tore through the receiver, stabbing directly into Chloe's eardrums, into her heart. Chloe! Her mother's shriek was ear-splitting. What did you do? Tell me what you did. Huh? Is that video real? Is it? Your father. Your father. He. Her mother's voice was cut off by a violent, heart-wrenching fit of coughing and gasping, followed by an even more piercing wail. He saw it. This afternoon, someone sent him that. That filthy thing. He just clutched his chest. His face turned purple. He couldn't even make a sound. Chloe, your father is gone. Just now. At the hospital. In the emergency room. They couldn't save him. A heart attack. You killed him. You literally killed him with shame. Boom. A bomb went off in Chloe's head, leaving nothing but white noise. All sound vanished. All her senses went numb. Only her mother's agonized, desperate cries echoed over and over against her fragile nerves. You killed him with shame. You killed him. The phone slipped from her cold, numb hand, landing with a soft thud on the thick carpet. The screen was still lit, her mother's grief-stricken sobs still faintly audible. Chloe sat there, stunned, her eyes wide open but completely empty, without a flicker of focus. The blood drained from her face, leaving it as white as bleached paper. She couldn't feel the cold, couldn't feel the blanket, couldn't feel her own heartbeat. The entire world twisted, spun, and collapsed before her eyes, finally dissolving into a boundless, suffocating darkness. Dad! Gone! Killed! By her! The words were like poison-tipped icicles, driving themselves deep into her marrow. An immense, overwhelming wave of fear and regret crashed over her, drowning her completely. She had no strength to struggle as she was dragged down into the cold, dark abyss. The blood in her veins seemed to solidify into sharp shards of ice, stabbing at her organs. She wanted to scream, but her throat felt as if it were being squeezed by an invisible hand, and no sound would come out. Only tears, huge, hot tears, bursting from her eyes without warning, streaming down her pale, cold cheeks, soaking into the blanket. She began to convulse violently, each spasm pulling at her heart, bringing a suffocating pain. She arched her back, curling into a shrimp-like ball in the depths of the armchair, her hands clawing at the fabric over her chest, her nails nearly digging into her own flesh. Her body shook uncontrollably, her teeth chattering, a suppressed, animalistic whimper escaping from deep in her throat. The most primitive sound of pain, forced out by sheer despair and bone-chilling cold. She melted like a puddle of wax, collapsing into the chair, drenched in a mixture of cold sweat and tears, clammy and frigid. Her world had shattered, and the sharp fragments were slicing into her every nerve. She was finished. Everything was finished. Her job, her marriage, her reputation. And now her father. Destroyed by her own hands. The study door had opened, silently, at some point. Jacob leaned against the doorframe. He had changed into a dark gray sweatsuit that made him look tall and fit. He held a cup of freshly brewed coffee, the steam gently blurring his expression. He stood there calmly, watching the woman on the sofa who had collapsed into a heap of misery, completely consumed by pain and despair. His gaze was distant, as if admiring a tragic painting, with a detached coolness and a faint, almost imperceptible scrutiny. Chloe's violent convulsions, her suppressed whimpers, the endless tears that could never wash away her sins. All of it registered clearly in the deep pools of his eyes. He didn't approach, didn't offer a tissue, didn't say a word. He just watched the fire she had started finally consume her, burning her soul to ashes. The coffee in his cup was rich and aromatic. Jacob raised it to his lips and took a sip. The warm liquid slid down his throat, a comforting heat. As he watched Chloe struggle futilely on the edge of her breakdown, watch her being eaten alive by the poison of regret, a heavy, almost tangible satisfaction erupted from deep within his chest, spreading like a geyser to every corner of his body. This feeling was deeper than the exhilaration from the red wine, more powerful and more fulfilling. It was like a perfect puzzle piece, fitting snugly into the black hole torn open by betrayal. He could clearly feel that cold, hate-filled void being filled, bit by bit, by this satisfaction he called judgment, packed down until it was as hard as iron. He stood in the doorway, holding his coffee for a long time. He waited until Chloe's whimpers faded into exhausted, deathly quiet sobs, until her body stopped shaking violently and only twitched occasionally, like a fish dying on the sand. Only then did Jacob pull his gaze away. He turned and walked back into the study. His steps were steady, without a trace of hesitation. He gently closed the door behind him. A soft click. The boundless, personal hell of Chloe's despair was once again locked firmly outside. The hospital hallway reeked of disinfectant and despair. The stark fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly, grayish pallor on everyone's face. Chloe was an empty shell, her soul gone, trailing numbly behind her mother. Her mother seemed to have aged 20 years overnight. Most of her hair had turned white, her back was deeply hunched, and her steps were unsteady. An old black winter coat hung loosely on her frame, making her look even smaller and more fragile. They were heading to the morgue behind the main hospital building. Her father's funeral had been a rushed, perfunctory affair. Almost no one was notified, just a few close relatives and some of her mother's old colleagues. The memorial hall was cold and empty. The hushed whispers, the averted eyes, the complicated, pitying glances, they were like 1,000 tiny needles pricking at Chloe's skin. She kept her head down the entire time, unable to look at her father's portrait, unable to look at her mother's bloodshot eyes. She felt like the filthiest thing at the funeral, a living, breathing pillar of shame. Her mother didn't say a single word to her throughout the entire ordeal. From pulling her father's white-sheeted body from a cold stainless steel drawer in the morgue, to watching his once strong frame slide into the roaring flames of the crematorium, to holding the small, heavy box of his ashes. Her mother only wept silently, enduring it all. The look in her eyes was no longer filled with the warmth and love of the past. It was just a hollow emptiness, and deep within that emptiness, an unspeakable despair and venom. That venomous gaze was sharper than any words, a red-hot brand that seared Chloe's insides. After they finished the last of the paperwork, Chloe helped her mother, who could barely stand, out the main entrance of the hospital. The midday sun beat down, its warmth a cruel illusion, so bright it hurt to look. Chloe instinctively squinted. Suddenly, a figure lunged out from the side. A gaunt man with greasy, matted hair, a scraggly beard, and a tattered jacket. He moved like a starving wolf that had scented blood, reeking of sour filth and a suffocating madness, and threw himself at Chloe. "You bitch! You fucking whore! It's all your fault! You did this to me! It was Patrick!" He was screaming, his voice a hoarse, broken rasp filled with guttural sobs and boundless hatred, his bloodshot eyes burning with a desire to destroy everything. In his hand, he clutched a half-empty plastic water bottle filled with a cloudy, yellowish liquid. "Ah!" Chloe's mother screamed in terror, her legs giving out as she nearly collapsed. Chloe was terrified, instinctively trying to back away. But Patrick was too fast, too frenzied. He grabbed a handful of her hair and yanked her backward hard. The sharp pain made Chloe cry out, her body tipping back uncontrollably. "Patrick, let go! Let go of her!" her mother cried, trying to pull him off. "Get off me, you old hag!" Patrick roared like a rabid beast, swinging his arm and violently shoving the frail woman to the ground. Her mother's forehead hit the cold concrete with a sickening thud, and blood immediately started to pour from the wound. "Mom!" Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking with horror. Patrick didn't care. He held Chloe's hair with one hand, forcing her head back, while his other hand brought the bottle up, ready to pour its contents onto her terrified, contorted face. The mouth of the bottle was almost touching her skin. "Ah!" Chloe let out a desperate, final scream. In that split second, thud, a dull impact. A hand, strong as an iron clamp, shot out from the side and seized Patrick's wrist, stopping his upraised arm in midair. The immense force froze Patrick's arm, and the liquid in the bottle sloshed violently, a few yellow drops splashing onto the ground beside them. They hit the concrete with a soft sizzle, and a wisp of white smoke rose up. Patrick whipped his head around, his twisted, savage face showing first shock, then an even more insane rage. "Who the hell? Let go!" When he saw who was holding his wrist, the rest of Patrick's words died in his throat. The rage on his face froze, replaced by a deeper, bone-chilling fear and venom. Jacob had appeared out of nowhere, standing right beside him. He was wearing a tailored dark gray overcoat, his posture perfect, his face cold and impassive, his eyes as still and bottomless as a frozen lake. He was effortlessly controlling Patrick's arm with one hand, as if dealing with a petulant child. The world around them fell silent. People coming and going from the hospital stopped in their tracks, staring at the sudden drama. Someone pulled out a phone. "Had enough, Patrick," Jacob said, his voice low but cutting through the silence. His tone was flat, terrifyingly calm. "In front of all these people, are you trying to commit murder?" Jacob's cold gaze made Patrick shudder, and the sharp pain in his wrist twisted his features. He looked at Jacob's placid face, and all his hatred, old and new, flooded his mind, shattering what little sanity he had left. Jacob! Patrick let out a feral roar and violently twisted his arm free. Jacob seemed to let him go. Most of the liquid in the bottle splashed out onto his own tattered jacket and the ground at his feet, sizzling and smoking. He paid it no mind, his bloodshot eyes locked on Jacob. It was you. You did this to me. You ruined me. You're the devil. He pointed a shaking finger at Jacob, then at Chloe, who was a terrified, disheveled mess. And you fucking bitch. The two of you. You can both rot in hell. His curses were hysterical, filled with desperate accusation and insane rage. Spittle flew from his mouth, his face contorted into a mask of pure hate. Jacob didn't react. He simply raised an eyebrow, watching Patrick's complete descent into madness, as if observing an absurd one-man show. His gaze swept over Patrick's stained, stinking jacket, his trembling body, and finally settled on the crazed, unfocused eyes. A very faint, almost imperceptible smile of satisfaction flickered at the corner of Jacob's mouth before vanishing, replaced by that same cold calm. Just then, hospital security and a few police officers who had been called to the scene finally arrived, rushing over. It took all their strength to wrestle the struggling, screaming Patrick to the ground. He continued to fight, spewing filth and desperate cries like a cornered animal being